we're seeing the idea of people being sanctioned, having their benefits completely withdrawn if they commit a crime like turning up too late for a job centre interview. I met a girl in a homeless hostel in Manchester who was 19 years old, who had been sanctioned off benefits because she was pregnant and she turned up late to an interview she'd overslept. They sanctioned her off full benefits. She was on £28 a week. The homeless hostel took £10 a week. She was living on £18 a week, which is roughly £2.50 a day, to feed herself and her unborn child. And if you look at the United Nations measure of poverty, that's roughly the Sudan level starvation existence. You know, that was not an uncommon story. I went back a few months ago to do something similar, a follow-up piece. Within 2 hours of getting into Manchester, finding people who had been sanctioned off benefits down to £2 a day. So we're getting to a stage where the conditions that Orwell saw and the situation that Orwell saw are returning. In a way, he was in the fortunate position of being able to look to the future and see ideas that were contributing to something positive. I don't know how many people here have kids. I've got daughters aged 11 and 9. It seems to me that we're the generation who can no longer be sure. Whereas perhaps my parents were sure that things would get better and there would be some sort of progress. We're now the generation who almost certainly will see a society that's worse at looking after the poor, worse at looking after the sick, worse at looking after the elderly. And all we can see is this gradual decline back to the days that existed before we were walked.
If I could say, I think following on from what Stephen just said, it's one of the interesting things about this book that seems very different from today is that Orwell can make the argument that one of the main arguments he makes is that the poor that he's dealing with in the first half of the book, the coal miners, are absolutely necessary to the functioning of the economy and basically provide the kind of basis for everything else that goes on in Britain, right? So that we wouldn't, his argument, if he was speaking today, he would say, well, these lights wouldn't be on, right, if not for the coal miners. So that all, you know, that this poverty plays an essential role in society, right? I think one of the things, if one was to try to, I mean, and it's, you know, people have tried to do it, but one of the harder arguments to make is that it doesn't feel today like one would say in Britain or in England that, well, you know, the poor are providing this essential service to us, and therefore we ought to. Do you see the difference? The poor may always be with us, but it's a different argument to make. We don't feel that the lights come on here. The lights come on because of Chinese migrant workers in Shenzhen or somewhere, you know, or do you see how that changes? It changes the dynamics of the problem a little bit, where the poverty whatever poverty or exploitation may be actually providing us with the lives that most of us lead doesn't exist here in our local sphere. The poverty exists as a kind of supplement to everything that's happening here, and it seems a bit different to me.
Yes, I think that's a good place for Jacqueline to come in. Well, I think I would agree with what Stephen was saying about, since we're going back to Orwell's time, that I'm noticing the families that we support. I mean, we support families, disadvantaged children families throughout Westminster, and one of the wards of our area, 59% of the children are living in poverty. It's the highest in the UK. And we're noticing a shift from the issues that the families are needing support with. Increasingly, families are coming to us needing food parcels, which is something we haven't seen for many years. I've been with this organisation for 16 years, and this is the first time families are unable to feed their children and needing help with food parcels.
And that's in Westminster, where our Parliament is, not in Wigan.
Exactly. So I certainly see a shift and going back in time to the real hardcore poverty of Orwell's time.
And we haven't heard from Gwenton.
Yeah.
Gwenton slowly.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. The way that poverty is measured has changed, and it's a whole paradigm shift of, for example, I work on the front line with a lot of young people and families on witness protection, and what you tend to find once you move to families, they're more interested in vouchers than actually the accommodation. And we were talking about food vouchers, £20 vouchers to buy basic meals, and that is very disturbing. If you think that your safety comes secondary to your food vouchers. And if we look at the games, the Olympic Games that just went, the two areas that are most deprived in London are right outside the Olympic Games, and they benefited. from the Olympics being there, and that will be Tower Hamlets and Newham, the two most deprived areas. Then we have to really think, how do we measure poverty if we've got the Olympic Games, which we've spent millions on, just outside a stone throw from the most poverty areas? And then we've got families looking at that and thinking, okay, we're here, we're starving, and we're having to look at the Olympic Games. So it's all about how do we measure poverty from the road to Wigan Pier when Orwell done it to our day. And it's all about how do we measure it. Poverty, I said this to someone in the week and they laughed. I said, there has to be poverty, because poverty brings jobs. And poverty generates a lot of people that have got projects that say that they're helping young kids and families to make money. And without poverty, a lot of people will be unemployed.
There has to be poverty. What do you have to say about that, Jacqueline?
I don't know what to say to that, actually. I mean, I don't know if there has to be poverty, but I mean, one of the things that I think is the biggest feature of poverty is the housing and homelessness. And I think Stephen mentions in his book, you know, that Orwell said that poverty is not just about money, and he mentions homelessness and housing. And that's the other big thing that we're seeing with the families, disadvantaged families that we support, that they were all either living in, they were homeless, living in temporary accommodation, and overcrowded accommodation. That's splitting up families, but it's also forcing young people out on the streets. And that's the key thing that we're kind of having to work with at the moment. Is, you know, there's a family that we support where a young person is living with his 4 siblings and his mother in a 2-bedroom house. And he chooses to live on the streets where he knows he's at risk, rather than live in that overcrowded accommodation. So housing, I think, is one of the big features of poverty.
I think this is going to be a really policy and long-distance answer, but I think that where Winston's right is, I think that the existence of poverty in Britain today is deliberately manufactured for a purpose. In that, at a time when you have a time of full employment and a time of a welfare state that's structured around people having jobs, the idea that the unemployment benefits people who come out of work for a period of time and then will go back into work. What you saw, and I think it's not, this is not a paranoid lizard's conspiracy theory. It's a set of ideas that came out of the University of Chicago that became what we call monetarism. Effectively design a world whereby there is a freedom of movement of capital and there is no equal exchange of rights for employees. So it's a deliberate ideological dismantling of the security and the safety net that was put in place at the end of the Second World War. And it was a set of ideas that were designed, created and exported specifically to do that. So now that doesn't work. It doesn't, what it's designed to do is to drive down costs and increase profits. And the way you do that is to make stuff cheaper. Natural resources are never going to get cheaper. Natural resources are going to get more expensive because we are running out of them. So the only way to cut those costs is to cut labour costs. And the only way to do that is to have different countries compete against each other for jobs, as we know. And that doesn't work if you have a sound welfare state and a well-established, sort of wealthy, active, organised population. So it's not the books are written on this. The way it works is you make the British compete with the Chinese for jobs. That's how it works. Apple, meanwhile, sits there with $65 billion in its bank account. And it could have made the phone in America and still made 50% margins, but it makes it in China for 75% margins. But if we don't have the poverty, if we don't have the fear, if we don't have that, we must compete with China for the jobs, because if we don't, we'll starve, then it doesn't work. The system only works if there is poverty and we're all scared. And that's really why there will always be poverty. So I agree, I entirely agree.